Good morning. Imagine a capital city, home to millions of people, just sort of slowly being strangled from the outside in. Food prices are skyrocketing, fuel convoys are burning on the highways, and the state's response isn't just military. It's to, well, pull up the proverbial drawbridge and completely shut down the press.
Yeah, a total informational and political lockdown.
Exactly. We are coming to you today with a measured, comprehensive look at exactly this kind of complex geopolitical environment. We're going to deal strictly with verified data, objective analysis, and a clear-eyed assessment of the facts on the ground across West Africa. No sensationalism, no panic.
Good morning. And, when we are looking at a region that's undergoing these rapid fundamental reorganizations of security and governance, absolute clarity is essential. We really have to separate the signal from the noise.
Right. And before we begin today's briefing, I want to establish the technical context for this deep dive.
Yep.
This analysis is sponsored by ProWave AI, and it's generated by Stylo News.
Which is important context for the data we're using.
It is. For those unaware, Stylo News is the consumer application of the Stylo Intel Ops software. That is an architecture originally designed exclusively for enterprise operations utilized by government, military, and global business leadership to navigate crises.
Right, it's an enterprise-grade tool.
Exactly. What that means for you, listening today, is that you have unique access to a tool explicitly built to support global decision makers. You are essentially receiving an intelligence-grade briefing this morning.
Which, frankly, is the level of precision we need to unpack today's parameters.
Absolutely. So the parameters for this deep dive are as follows. Title: West Africa under pressure. Mali, Niger, and Nigeria in focus. Region: West Africa. Date: 3 June 2026. Looking at the scope of our operations today, what is the core mission of this briefing?
Well, our mission today is to map out the primary patterns of events unfolding over the past 2 weeks across Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. But, we aren't just going to read a list of events.
Right, that wouldn't be very useful.
Exactly. We need to track the compounding impacts of these events at the local, national, and international levels. We'll examine the stated positions of key decision makers, analyze the sentiment flowing through social media to understand the public reality, and ultimately synthesize this data to outline the most probable future scenarios for you.
Let's begin with current intelligence, indicating the epicenter of this reorganization, which is Mali. We've seen some rapid territorial and political shifts in just the past few weeks.
We really have.
Looking at the verified security situation on the ground, things have significantly deteriorated following those coordinated offensives back in April.
They have, yes. The primary actors responsible here are JNIM, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate, operating in parallel with the Azawad Liberation Front, or the SLA. And it is important to note that these are not isolated, disorganized skirmishes.
Right, these are sophisticated maneuvers.
Highly sophisticated. These groups executed complex operations that resulted in the capture of the northern city of Kidal. And Kidal has historically been a stronghold and really a bellwether for control of the north.
Absolutely.
But beyond that, they successfully projected power southward, executing attacks dangerously close to the capital, Bamako. In one of those engagements, Mali's defense minister was actually killed.
Which is a direct, calculated strike at the very heart of the state's security apparatus. But what really stands out to me in the intelligence is how JNIM is operating right now. They seem to have moved well beyond traditional asymmetric hit-and-run warfare.
Yeah, that is the crucial shift here. JNIM is currently executing a deliberate strategy of economic strangulation.
Eating what exactly? On the ground.
Meaning they are maintaining physical blockades on major supply routes. They are systematically destroying fuel transport convoys on the highways outside Bamako.
Now, you might be wondering how an insurgent blockade of a single capital city impacts the broader region. And the answer is, well, cascading failures. At the local and national levels, this creates an immediate, severe economic strain.
Right.
We are tracking the displacement of hundreds of thousands of civilians escaping the central and northern violence. But the blockade itself has triggered acute inflation in staple goods across the entire country.
And because regional supply chains in West Africa are so deeply integrated, the fallout doesn't just stop at Mali's borders.
Right, it spills over.
It does.
Yeah.
For instance, we are observing severe inflation in livestock prices. Cattle are traditionally driven south to markets, but these blockades have completely severed those routes. As a result, this inflation in Mali is actively causing market disruptions and food security anxieties as far south as Côte d'Ivoire.
To compound this stress, Mali is simultaneously managing a localized public health crisis. There is a documented spike in dengue fever cases right now.
Which makes sense given the displacement.
Exactly. When you have mass displacement, sanitation infrastructure collapses. Vector control, like routine mosquito spraying, just stops. And standing water in refugee camps quickly becomes a breeding ground. This strains a medical infrastructure that is already overwhelmed by combat casualties.
And this brings us to the perspective of the primary decision-maker in Bamako, General Assimi Goïta. When a state faces an existential military threat, severe economic inflation, and a public health crisis all at once, leadership is forced into drastic maneuvering.
And Goïta's maneuver is essentially a rapid, total consolidation of state power. Following his defense minister's death, he simply assumed the defense ministry portfolio himself.
Right, consolidating control.
He has formally dissolved domestic political parties, making it very clear that regime stability and military control take absolute precedence over any democratic transition schedules. He has categorically rejected diplomatic negotiations with the insurgent factions, and just recently, the Ministerial Council adopted sweeping legislative texts to create state-directed regional media outlets.
To enforce what they call media sovereignty.
Exactly, media sovereignty.
It is a profound centralization of authority. I mean, the administration clearly views any internal political division or any unvetted external information as a critical vulnerability that insurgents or foreign adversaries will exploit.
It sounds to me like Goïta is literally pulling up the drawbridge. If you are shutting down internal political dissent, taking direct control of the military, and blocking external media influence, you aren't trying to govern a peacetime nation. You are preparing a fortress for a siege.
That fortress mentality is exactly how Bamako is operating right now. The walls are manned, and all resources are directed inward towards state survival.
But the geopolitical reality is that a drawbridge only protects the castle, right? It abandons the countryside. Mali's strategy does not actually contain the threat. Borders in the Sahel region are vast, and they are highly porous.
Really porous, yes.
So the instability inside Mali is currently spilling directly over the border into Niger, creating a massive security vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. Both terrorist organizations and transnational criminal networks are rushing in to exploit it.
And we are seeing that spillover materialize with devastating effect. In Niger's Tillabéri region, which shares that border with Mali, JNI has aggressively expanded its operational footprint.
What's the latest data point on that?
The most significant data point from the past 2 weeks is a major assault on the Garbunya military base. JNIM fighters overran the installation, resulting in 67 casualties among soldiers and civilians. They looted the armory to resupply, and crucially, they delayed the Nigerian military's quick reaction forces by heavily mining the approach roads.
Wow.
It was a highly sophisticated operation that really highlights how deeply the Nigerian military is struggling to secure its western frontier.
And where state security fails, illicit economies thrive. We have verified reports of massive transnational criminal activity operating in this exact same geographic space. I was reading the reports on the logistics involved here, and the scale is staggering.
It truly is. I mean, authorities in Zinder, Niger just intercepted a record-breaking seizure of cocaine. Simultaneously, the Algerian military intercepted a massive convoy moving through the Sahara, heavily laden with both military-grade weaponry and narcotics.
We really have to remember why the Sahara is used this way. It is a vast, largely ungoverned space. This confirms that the Sahel isn't just a theater for ideological insurgency. It is a primary, highly lucrative transit corridor for global organized crime. Moving heavy weapons and tons of narcotics across the desert requires immense, well-funded logistical networks.
Which complicates the theater immensely. But it becomes even more complex when we look at the international dynamics and the state actors operating by proxy inside Niger. The situation in eastern Niger is deeply fractured. Intelligence indicates that the Chadian government, under Kaka Debi, is actively supporting rebellions by the Tubu clan against the Nigerian government.
For a bit of context for you listening, the Tubu are a nomadic Saharan people whose traditional territories span across Chad, Niger, and Libya. But why is Chad backing a rebellion inside Niger right now?
It is a classic geopolitical pressure tactic. This proxy conflict is happening near Agadem, which houses Niger's vital oil infrastructure. By backing these rebel factions, Chad gains leverage over Niger's border security and potentially influences the flow of regional oil revenues. It means the Nigerian government is effectively surrounded by hostility.
And into this incredibly complex environment steps the United States. On May 29th, the U.S. delivered a new package of military aid to Niger. This is a calculated attempt by Washington to maintain a counterterrorism partnership in a country that is being heavily courted by the Russian Africa Corps, who already have a significant footprint in neighboring Mali.
Exactly. It is a very clear competition for influence through security assistance.
But I have to push back a bit on the practical application of this American strategy. Consider the logistical reality on the ground. How exactly can the Nigerian government effectively deploy this new U.S. military aid when they are completely overextended?
That's a fair question.
They are fighting heavily armed jihadist insurgencies in the west, in Tillaberi, and simultaneously fighting state-backed, heavily armed rebel factions in the east near Agadir. If the threat is 360 degrees, how does a struggling military avoid simply diluting this aid until it's practically useless?
Well, that is the defining strategic dilemma for NIME right now. The risk is severe. The U.S. aid could be absorbed into the Eastern resource war against jihadi and proxies, which is absolutely not Washington's intent. Or it is deployed piecemeal in the West and simply overwhelmed by JNIM's superior local networks. It is a highly precarious balancing act for the Nigerian state.
And the pressure inside Niger doesn't stop at its borders either. The country is acting as a funnel. Because of the violence and the economic collapse in the Sahel, both displaced civilian populations and militant ambitions are being pushed relentlessly southward directly into Nigeria. They are essentially exporting the Sahel's collapse right onto Abuja's doorstep.
The human toll of this funnel effect is highly visible. Just in the past week alone, over 1,100 Nigerian migrants who had been stranded in Agadez, Niger, due to the collapse of regional stability, were returned to Kano State in northern Nigeria. Processing and reintegrating that volume of people requires significant state resources. But alongside the migration of displaced people, we are tracking the migration of the militant threat itself.
So let's examine the security situation in Nigeria because they are currently fighting a dual-front crisis of their own.
They are. In the north, the primary threat remains the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP. Intelligence estimates place their operational center of gravity firmly in Borno State and the Lake Chad Basin. But what is critical for you to understand is how their tactics have evolved. This is no longer a rudimentary insurgency.
Right, the era of the low-tech insurgents seems to be over. They are operating with a capability that mirrors a modern national military. How exactly are they doing this?
Well, ISWAP has developed a highly sophisticated hybrid intelligence and strike capability. They are actively utilizing weaponized drones.
Weaponized drones.
Yes, they've been expanding this capability since late 2024, modifying commercial drones to carry explosive payloads to monitor and attack Nigerian military convoys. They paired this aerial surveillance with deep, localized informant network spotters on the ground who provide early warning of troop movements. Furthermore, they coordinate all of this using short-cycle encrypted communications.
Meaning that by the time standard military listening posts intercept and decrypt their communications, the operational window has already closed.
Precisely. They are highly adaptable. But while the military focuses heavily on ISWAP in the north, we are seeing acute security failures emerge in the south. Most notably, the recent abduction of over 45 schoolchildren by armed gunmen in southwestern Oyo State.
Which is horrifying.
It is, and it demonstrates that the state's monopoly on security is being aggressively challenged on multiple geographically distant fronts simultaneously.
However, the Nigerian state is striking back, and they are doing so with high-level international intelligence support. The May 17th counterstrike is a prime example of this.
It is. On May 17th, Nigerian forces executed a meticulously planned joint air-land assault, heavily supported by United States intelligence and surveillance. The operation was a success. It resulted in the death of Abu Bilal al-Manuki, who was the global second-in-command of ISIS, along with 17 other militants, including key tactical instructors.
This was a precision decapitation strike. They bypassed the foot soldiers and entirely removed a node of the leadership structure. But when we look at the decision-maker perspectives in Nigeria regarding this level of foreign involvement, we see a very polarized spectrum of reactions.
We do. President Bola Tinubu has openly welcomed the U.S. strikes. He has moved to consolidate internal security by appointing a new special advisor on Homeland Security. The Tinubu administration clearly views the U.S. partnership as a necessary force multiplier against an entrenched, technologically advanced enemy.
And on the other side?
Well, former Leader General Abdulsalami Abubakar has taken a broader view. He is publicly calling for deep political unity across ethnic lines, arguing that military action alone cannot solve the crisis without credible, unified political leadership to address the root causes of the insurgency.
But there is also strong, vocal pushback against Tinubu's strategy of leaning on U.S. intelligence, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Prominent figures such as the Islamic cleric Sheikh Ahmad Gumi have issued severe warnings. Their perspective is that inviting foreign military involvement strips Nigeria of its sovereignty. Furthermore, they argue that a visible U.S. intelligence and strike presence acts as a beacon, ultimately attracting more foreign terror groups to Nigerian soil. The fear is that Nigeria becomes merely a proxy battleground for global jihadists to fight the West.
Which transitions us from the physical battlefield directly to the ideological one. Because while governments are deploying drones and coordinating airstrikes, the actual battle for legitimacy and public support is playing out right now on social media and in the halls of diplomatic summits.
And to understand this ideological front, we rely on the Stylo Intel Ops social media sentiment analysis, specifically tracking data across X over the past 2 weeks. The data reveals two dominant parallel narratives among the public.
Looking at the data you provided, I was honestly struck by the sheer volume of the first narrative, which is this anti-Western sentiment. People aren't just skeptical of Western involvement. They are actively cheering for alternative foreign interventions.
That's right. The pro-sovereignty and anti-Western sentiment is highly organized and intensely hostile toward Western democratic models, particularly French or U.S. military involvement. Conversely, we see significant volumes of users actively praising the Malian military junta and notably the Russian Africa Corps.
Praising them for what, exactly?
Users are applauding their hardline, aggressive military actions against terrorists and what is perceived as a zero-tolerance stance on political corruption.
And the second major narrative running parallel to that.
The second is characterized by severe alarm and fear. So despite the praise for the military in some quarters, there is massive, widespread anxiety regarding JNIM. Users are describing JNIM not just as a terror group, but as a quote-unquote parallel state that is successfully holding and governing territory.
That's a terrifying concept for those living there.
Very much so. There is a palpable fear across the region of this conflict spilling permanently into Nigeria, coupled with deep concern over escalating civilian casualties caused by both jihadist attacks and state-directed military airstrikes.
This social media sentiment really perfectly mirrors the macro-level geopolitical shifts we are seeing on the ground. Take France, for example. Facing immense public and governmental backlash across the Sahel, France has effectively withdrawn its military forces and is currently executing a strategic pivot toward Kenya.
Which is a massive realignment. Why Kenya? Because Kenya represents a stable, Anglophone, tech-forward anchor in East Africa. France is essentially abandoning a failing counterinsurgency model in the Francophone Sahel for a more traditional strategic partnership model elsewhere. This is creating significant diplomatic friction, effectively drawing a line between Francophone and Anglophone Africa.
Furthermore, the traditional regional political bloc, ECOS, is fragmenting. The junta-led states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have formally broken away to form their own alliance, the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. But here is the paradox in the intelligence that stands out to me. If you look at the sentiment analysis, social media users in the region express a fierce, uncompromising desire for national sovereignty. They want to be entirely free of French or American influence.
Right.
Yet simultaneously, many of these same users are loudly applauding the intervention of foreign private military contractors like Russia's Africa Corps, simply because it yields rapid, visible military results. It's a profound contradiction. You're trading one form of foreign dependence for another, all under the banner of independence.
It highlights a very pragmatic, if dangerous, calculation by the public. When the threat is at your door, immediate physical security is prioritized over long-term institutional sovereignty. People want to feel safe today. They will worry about who is providing the safety tomorrow.
Let us synthesize these facts and focus on actionable foresight. Based on the data patterns from the past 2 weeks, what are the primary watch points we should be monitoring in the immediate future?
We have identified 3 critical watch points for you. First, in Mali, we must watch the implementation of those new regional media laws. Will creating a unified, state-run information network successfully unite the Sahel states as intended, or will it simply isolate them further from the international community and blind them to internal realities? Additionally, we must monitor whether JNIM can sustain its insurgent pressure and economic blockades around Bamako.
Second, regarding Nigeria.
Right. We must track the potential southward diffusion of ISWAP. Intelligence indicates they may be probing into Kogi and Ondo states. We need to monitor if the current U.S. intelligence sharing model is actually effective in preventing further mass casualty events or school abductions outside the traditional northeastern conflict zones.
And finally, we need to keep an eye on the regional economy, which is showing massive divergence.
The economic indicators are entirely split right now. On one hand, we are tracking severe economic strain across the region due to disrupted cross-border livestock trade and conflict-driven inflation. On the other hand, you have Nigeria's massive Dangote refinery, which is now actively boosting its jet fuel exports. You have a scenario where one state is achieving a new level of industrial and economic independence, while its immediate neighbors are facing structural economic collapse. Watching how these two realities collide will really dictate regional stability for the next decade.
This level of detailed tracking, connecting the micro events to the macro trends, is really what sets Stylo News apart. If you require this depth of intelligence for your own decision-making, it is readily accessible. Stylo News is available as a mobile and computer application that you can download and customize. It allows you to build personal, intelligence-style briefs drawn directly from hundreds of traditional news sources and real-time data from X. To leverage this tool, subscribe to Stylo News to get AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
And looking ahead to our future briefings, join us this Friday for the Stylo News Intel Update strategic debate topic. Is North Korea primarily focused on regime survival? Or is it actively positioning itself to reshape the balance of power in Northeast Asia?
Thank you all for joining us today for this deep dive. We appreciate your time and your attention to these critical global shifts.
It has been a pleasure. Please feel free to reach out and request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
I want to leave you with one final thought to consider as you digest today's briefing. Over the past 20 minutes or so, we have watched states pull up the drawbridge to survive, and we have watched international borders dissolve under the pressure of insurgencies and private military companies. If traditional states in the Sahel lose the absolute monopoly on violence and must rely on foreign mercenaries or local vigilantes to provide basic security for their citizens, does the very definition of a nation-state permanently change for the 21st century? Think about it. Have a good day.